Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Bufnagle the podcast, where we explore entertaining and enlightening discussions of the adventure of life and all things good. From science and technology to history and philosophy to leadership and success. We hope to give you a better understanding of the world and skills for everyone to pursue their own adventure.
So that should make it go.
Excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Bufnagle the podcast, where we talk about all things good in the pursuit of the adventure of life. I'm Harry. I'm joined again by Rafe, who has decided to enlighten us this evening, afternoon, morning, midnight, autumn's eve. I don't know. Are we in fall yet?
We're not in fall. Fall comes in about 3 weeks, I think.
All right. So this is a pre-autumnal journey that Rafe is going to take us on. How are you doing?
I am, well, first of all, as usual, I'm fantastic because today is a great day to be doing a podcast with you because we have the world's greatest listeners who have made us a Global Top 10% podcast. They know that they can reach us at bufnagle@bufnagle.com. They know to share the love, share the buff, send us 5-star reviews, subscribe, hit the like button, hit the smiley star button. They know to tell their friends to listen, and they will get a free episode. And if we get good reviews, then we get brownies and cookies. So that's a good thing. So I'm good because of that. But Harry, I'm also sore. I am.
I am too. Let me tell you.
Your brother keeps beating me up in the gym.
Oh, how is he doing that?
Well, he's telling me to lift heavy things.
And then set them back down, pick them back up again.
Pick them up, put it down. Pick it up, put it down. Pick it up. So I'm doing no net work. Okay, I'm moving a mass through a distance, but I'm returning it to that, so there's no network there, but it's, I tell you, my muscles, when you get older, I remember like in football practice when I was a kid, you would exercise that morning and that evening you'd be sore, and the next day you would be very sore, but over the day, it'd go pretty quick. This one, like when you get older, your body gets so slow is you don't even get sore right away. It takes like a full day to get sore.
That's an actual thing.
Oh, really?
It's called delayed onset muscle soreness.
Is that do I have a unique physiology?
No, it's actually very standard. It's even if you were going to lift heavy weights in any fashion, what usually ends up happening is that there is a delay of your muscle soreness, delayed onset. So it's not always, if I work out in the evening, I'm not always going to be sore first thing in the morning. I'll probably be sore later that evening or the next morning.
Yeah.
Well,
it gets worse as you get older. Your body just becomes, it's like, I'll get sore on my own time.
That's right. Yeah. And I got sore over this past couple of days building a 49 square foot patio.
Yeah. Wow. And at 1 square foot per top for.
That's right.
paver?
About 1 square foot every 10 minutes.
Yeah. Do the math, huh?
Yep.
Is it done?
It's done. It is done. I put these 1x1 pavers in, and I put all the sand in between the crevasses. There were no pumas.
I was with the pumas. Okay, for those of you who don't know, that's a reference to which one is it?
Smothers Brothers.
Yeah, I know, but we have that on one of the shows. We actually
I don't know. It's you look up Pumas Smothers Brothers on YouTube and laugh for about 2.5 minutes. It's very good.
Yes, very, very good stuff. So okay, yeah.
10 minutes per square foot, putting down these 1x1 concrete pavers, filling in a bunch of sand for a certain area, but I got it all outlined with the dirt that I dug up to kind of support it. Mm-hmm. And then about 45 minutes after I was complete, it rained.
Oh, great!
Which was great timing.
Now,
so I probably got to go back out there today and re-sweep some sand and make sure it's still stable.
Yeah, it gets where it needs to be. Now, you remember to remove the children from the sand before placing the pavers? Is that?
Yes. Sometimes I had to raise my voice a little bit and tell them to move out of the way.
To extract? No. Daddy just made that smooth for a reason.
Yes. Yeah. No, you cannot be a mermaid today.
Well, speaking of mermaids... I can't come up with a mermaid segue here. I was, as you know, I spent a good deal of this summer in summer school in 2 places, essentially in Alsace, which is in in France. It's also partly in Germany, and we'll talk about that a little bit. And then I spent some time in Bruges, and we're going to spend a little time today going through the first part of my visit there in Barr, which is the little town in Alsace where we were. So how's that sound? Is that are you all on board with that?
Yeah. Okay. Run me through it. Tell me all about your adventures, because I feel like I haven't talked to you in about 8 weeks.
Yeah, it has been about that time. So Barr is it's a little town. It's 7,000 people. It is an old, I guess I'll call it an industrial town. It has been traded, like all of Alsace, has been traded back and forth over the centuries. And I looked this up. Okay, so Alsace is now in France, and it was in Germany from 40 to 45-ish, and after 1871, the Franco-Prussian War, it was annexed by Germany. And after World War I, 1918, it went back to France. So it goes like this. From as long as they can remember up to 1648, it was in Germany. And then from 1648 to 1871, it was in France. And then from 1871 to 1918, it was in Germany. And from 1918 to 1940, it was in France. And from 1940 to 1945, it was in Germany. And from 1945, it's on the
losing side of all these world wars.
Well, Germany takes it, they lose the war, and they have to give it back. I mean, that's kind of how that's how it goes. And then from 1945-ish to the present, it's been in France. And I assume when I left, it was in France. I assume it's still in France. It's right on. It's the Rhine River Valley kind of separates France and Germany, and this is wine country down there. It's very, very pretty, rolling hills and very lush green, small farming communities, some industrial towns like Barr. And by industrial, it's kind of like the industrial that Hartford, Wisconsin was when I was a kid, except I was a kid in the 70s and 80s, and Barr was an industrial town like in the Middle Ages. And there were lots of tanneries in town. There were like dozens of them. That was a big thing they did was tan things. They turned hides into
leather.
Pelts into leather, into belts, and what else do you like? Cloaks,
pelts and belts,
belts, and cloaks, and saddles. Things you make out of leather, seats, cushy seats for your wagon, that sort of thing.
Shoes,
and shoes. Yeah, there you go, shoes. And wait, can you make a shield out of leather? Do you put leather on a shield?
I'm sure you can. It may not be as effective as some other shields.
Yeah, metal shield is probably. You know what? You need that shield if you're going to go into the shield business. Make those Captain America shields because they act like boomerangs, right?
Yes. Yeah. They return to sender.
Yes. So industry has moved out of these little towns like Barr, and it is there's one tannery left, and part of the question that Barr is facing now in the early 21st century is that they are now just a little town that doesn't have a lot of industry. Their people live there, and they commute to some of the bigger little towns that are nearby. And but it's like a little fairy tale, Harry. It's still a medieval village, very small, narrow roadways. It has old shops and architecture there. That was the reason we were there. Most of the architecture there is a thing called half timber. Is the official frame. They're half timber homes. So, and you've seen these things.
You build them like half out of wood and half out of stone.
Well, yes, but the halving isn't at the top and the bottom. The halving is like you'll take timbers, like big timbers, like I'm going to go to inches here, like 14 inches square, a big long timber, and those kinds of timbers will make the big framing pieces of your house, like a big post in each corner, a large beam across them, supporting pillars here and there around windows. And then every now and then you will take one of these timbers and put it at an angle. And this is kind of a deciding feature that you can put them all vertical, but if you take a bunch of sticks and you put them vertical, they can slosh around. And what you need to do is you need to put some of them at an angle and secure them at an angle, because then when you try to move it laterally, that creates forces that prohibit the lateral movement.
An opposing force. Yep.
Yeah. So you'll have some of them leaning left and some of them leaning right. On each floor, in each wall space, you're going to have at least one or two of those some of those beams at an angle. And they would build these. This is what we did at the course. We studied like this stuff. Okay, so there's, I guess a big learning for me was that there's really two. When people talk about architecture, when these people talk about architecture, they talk about two basic kinds of architecture. And the words I'm going to use, I think are pretty consistent around the world. Is that you have I'll call it grand architecture, which is officially, I think, called style architecture. So you'll have things like churches, cathedrals, things like government buildings, the town hall, the courthouse, that kind of thing, large civic structures, battlement castles and, the gates to the city, those kinds of things that mean something to the whole populace. That's style architecture. And it will tend to it has these names that you recognize, like Baroque and Gothic and Romanesque. And okay, so these are styles for some of these gigantic buildings. And then there's the architecture of the people, which is
peasantry architecture.
What was that?
I was going to say peasantry architecture.
Yeah, it is a no. It's called vernacular architecture. It is how the people speak their architecture, and in this and the thing that the group that put on these two summer schools that I went to, which is it's the round table of architecture, but it's said in French. It's la table ronde, de l'architecture, something like that, But if you type in round table of architecture, you'll be able to get there. And the website is in both French and English and maybe Flemish too. I don't know. I can't keep track of all these languages, but they do a great job of promoting what they call traditional architecture, which is if you're going to build a house in Alsace in 1540 or something like that, what do you have at your disposal? You have big trees.
Yep.
Right, that are in the areas. You have mud, you have rocks, you got sticks, and you have clay that you can use to make tiles for your roof. So you will build in a vernacular language that is consistent with your area, with materials that are at hand, and in a style that meets your needs. Now, the thing about the half timber architecture here, they call it half timber because that first layer, once you put up that first layer of timbers, of beams and supports and stuff like that, you will take in between those beams, you'll cut a notch in the inside piece of that big beam. So the big beam's going vertical, and in the middle of that gigantic 14-inch wide beam, you'll cut a notch maybe an inch and a half wide. And in there, you're going to wedge. You go out to the woods because there's woods nearby, right? Mm-hmm. And you'll get some sticks, and you'll break the sticks to the right length, and you kind of wedge the sticks in there, and you'll interweave them, and then you will put smaller sticks in between the bigger sticks. Now you have like a lattice of sticks, small sticks, inch in diameter or less, 3/4 of an inch. And you'll have this lattice thing in between the beams. And then you will go out to the other field and you'll dig up some dirt and you'll get some grass and you'll add some water and you'll mix it up and you make some gooey
drywall.
Well, yeah, you're making a plaster. You're making a plaster out of mud and earthen materials. And you will pack that stuff. You'll hang it on the stick lattice you have, and you'll pack it into the corners. And this will be a thick wall. I mean, this will be, sometimes these walls can be as thick as 50 centimeters, which is like,
wow, yeah,
foot and a half or so. And so depending upon what kind of boards you have and how much layering you do on that, you'll get this stuff. And then what you do is you go to the local limestone quarry, which is just down the road, and you get some limestone and you grind it up and you cook it and you make lime out of it. And then you add some water and it becomes essentially plaster. And you put plaster on it and you get something that looks kind of like stucco. It's smooth and it's kind of whitish, and you can add pigments to it, local pigments, whatever you have, you mix that, or you can paint it with whatever you got. And part of the purpose of the people, of the homes that people built in Alsace was that they thought of homes not like we do. In fact, the word in French for realtor is something like is like things that are immobile. Okay, so so you're buying something that doesn't move. But the old houses, they designed these homes with these timbers to be to be like very large pieces of furniture. So the idea was that this house was built to be moved.
Interesting.
Okay, and so you
Like on horseback or on a
here's what you would
wagon
do.
or what?
Well, when you put those beams together, you would connect them with what we call mortise and tenon joinery, right? So a mortise is means the word means mouth, and tenon means tongue. So there's a tongue that a slot, a tab in the edge of the wood that you would on one beam, and there's a mouth on the other beam, and they kind of the tongue goes into the mouth, and then you put some pegs, you drill some holes, and you put some wooden pegs into those holes, and that locks the mortise and tenon together. And then you do all the stuff with the mud and the sticks and the plaster, and there's your house. And then a couple of years later, when you switch from Germany to France or whatever you want to do, you say, I'm moving to the other side of the valley or whatever. Right. So you take the stones and the sticks and you rip those out and you throw them back on the ground because they're just earth. And then you take a mallet and a peg remover tool that you've created in your workshop.
Probably just another peg.
Yeah, another peg. And you pop out the pegs and you put little marks on your beams and you load them onto a wagon and you drag them across the valley and you rebuild the house somewhere else. And
interesting.
Yeah, what's really interesting about that to me was that, there's very little of the modern building mechanisms in there. So you have this material, this mud, stick, grass, goo that hardens. It's an organic substance that quite literally breathes. It breathes not in the sense that air goes through it, but moisture can go into it and moisture can come out of it. And if you want the wood that is supporting the structure to not rot, it doesn't really matter if the wood gets wet as long as the wood gets dry.
Right. Yep.
Right. So if you want to ruin wood, you have to put it somewhere where it gets a little bit damp and it kind of sits damp, like in a pile of leaves in the woods.
I was going to say like underground. Yeah.
Yeah. But underground is one thing because if it's underground, then there's no oxygen down there. And even if it does get wet, that's not going to be as big of an issue as if it can get what you don't want is it damp. You don't want it damp all the time, but available so that bugs and mold and all these other things can get in there and break it apart. So because it's organic, it breathes and it's, and these things last forever. Well, not forever.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, the listeners here don't even realize or recognize yet that we are so far off topic compared to what your show notes have given us.
Well, wait, the first topic says
nothing less.
The first topic says Barr, Alsace, France. And we're still talking about Barr.
Yeah, but there's 4 categories underneath that, which is we traded back and forth. Okay, got it. We talked about the Germans and the French, how it's an old industrial town and tanneries.
Yeah.
Your next note is you signed their golden book.
Yes, we did sign the golden book. Okay, so one thing.
Does that mean you are it says under here, liberators from World War II all sorts of others?
We are all sorts of others is who we are. It was, okay, so there were 2 great things that happened with the mayor. Okay, so we were in Barr, which is this little tiny town, and we met the mayor. And part of what we were doing is we were there to study and to learn, but also our big projects dealt with looking at buildings in Barr that, how do I put it gently, that aren't quite up to the Barr standard. Okay, so maybe they were renovated in 1955, and they look like a bad version.
They look out of place.
Thank you, very good. They look out of place. So we met with the mayor early on, and the mayor gave us a tour. The mayor gave us a tour. What do they say in Les Mis? Les Meilleurs, right? But it's female, so it's probably La Meilleure, something like that. Okay. The French speakers will fix me on that. But we were in the room where they have the important things in the city hall there in Hôtel de Ville, which is the city of the building of the town, the house of the town. And we were in that room, and she was talking in French, and they were being translated to those of us who aren't French speakers, obviously me. And there's a big painting on the wall of a big battle they fought a long time ago, and she was talking about how they have this remembrance book where all these people came in and signed the book when they did something important in Barr. And the first people in the book are the Allied troops that liberated Barr back in 1944. And then I forget exactly how this came about, because one of these things that came about was my fault. I'm going to say this was this is part of this.
That.
Yeah, but one of these things was my fault. But I don't think this was my fault. I think there was some conversation going around about the golden book, because she brought it out of this special cabinet and she opened it up. It was in this magic box with like a gold key or something like that, and she was showing us all these things in there. And somebody said, "So you want us to sign it?" And I think she said, I don't know if she said no or yes or maybe or something, but pretty soon we were all lining up to sign the golden book. And so we signed the Barr Golden Book, which was great fun. And it was, I tell you, the people there, Harry, this was consistent across the 8 weeks of my European trip. I was met with nothing other than what's a word for gigantic hospitality? It was just overflowing.
I would say gratitude, but that's probably not quite right.
Well, I had gratitude for their hospitality. They were so hospitable. Everyone I met in Barr, and when I went up through Cologne and I made it up to Bruges, everybody it was just, there was
so
a
this
lot
is
of,
much different
there was a lot
than
of joy.
your, this is much different than your Paris trip in 2003, 2004?
Yeah, I did. Well, we didn't come to fisticuffs back then, but there were some things that didn't quite go as well back then. But this was great. And the mayor of Barr was fantastic. We got interviewed. Did I tell you I got interviewed for the local paper? Did we?
Yeah, multiple times.
Yeah. Okay. Well, see, now that I am an international podcast celebrity, I'm also an international media celebrity. There was an article in French in one of these newspapers.
Yeah. So was this article specifically about you, or was it about the round architecture thing?
It was about the round table of architecture. It was the story. It was like they were very excited that these essentially dozen students from around the world were coming to Barr to study Barr. And it's a wonderful thing for a small town. You've never lived in a town this size, but there was one guy who was in the newspaper, and I met him, and we ran into this guy everywhere we went. Like, we would go to the little party on Saturday night. He'd be there. We'd walk through town. I ran him at the grocery store. We'd see him at the bakery in the morning. We saw this guy everywhere. And he was, I was a novelty in that I was an old grown up. All the students here.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. All the other students were somewhere between, I'll say probably 21 and 33, with the exception of one lady who was, I think, in her 40s. And then that was me at pushing 60. And they just, they loved the story of a retired mathematician going to Barr to study architecture. I mean,
because you got to imagine that kind of thing never happens, right? It's, I'm an architecture student at Savannah College of Art and Design. And yeah, right. But I'm an architecture student, and I have this opportunity to go to Europe and to France and to see all of these different things and study architecture in its own place.
In situ.
Right?
Yes.
Right. And suddenly there's going to be this other guy who is from a different generation, in a way, a different walk of life, who has an appreciation for these things and not necessarily a career-driven aspiration.
Right. And I think the people in Barr, part of their, like I said, they were so hospitable. It was like something out of a 1950s America kind of storytelling thing. Like every one of them, everybody you met, it was like coming out of a fairy tale book. And I think a lot of them were very appreciative of us coming there, because the city is it's undergoing some change, right? So there's a lot of tanneries. There's one of them left. It's moving outside of town. So the town has to look at what's it going to do? Now there's this gigantic tannery in the middle of downtown. What do you do with it? That was one of the questions that some of our students answered, is what should we do with this space? It's in the city. You could put up apartments. You could make a park. You could put in soccer stadium. You could do a zillion things. Mm-hmm. What should they do, and what should it look like? And I think they were honored that Barr got selected by the group that oversaw this, by La Table Ronde, to study this, and they were so genuinely appreciative that we were there. The mayor met us on multiple occasions, and long story short, at the end of this thing, we presented what we did to update some of these buildings to make them, I'll call it the Barr standard, but that's a little arrogant on my part to say that, to bring it up to looking like it fits in there in the time frame. And it's just, I think everybody was just so grateful that everybody was grateful for everybody. It was like this kind of joint pat yourself on the back thing.
Yeah, you keep mentioning this idea of putting the buildings and the architecture back into the Barr standard or to the Barr ideal or its look. I can think of one other place that does that I have been to, West
Point, yeah.
Right? And they recently, over the past, this was after I left, but they were starting to do the base foundation. They put in new barracks that were up and above the hill where I was behind the mess hall.
Okay.
But they had to do it with the right granite, with the right structure to make sure it was in line with everything else that was already there, that it doesn't look out of place, but it's still semi-modern. To anybody else who's been at West Point, the most recent modern building other than Davis Barracks
is the library.
Yeah. Which is still huge glass panels all on one side, but the rest of the building is granite. Mm-hmm. So it's very modern in the sense of you have these glass panels, but it still maintains and retains its identity, I would say.
Well, that's the thing that if you ever want to understand the nature of branding, go to West Point, go to the United States Military Academy at West Point, and see how they're constantly marketing themselves to keep the name pure, and the association people have with the name should mean something. It should create something. And I think the people in Barr wanted their town to be a certain thing. And it's kind of hard to define it, because you talk to 100 people in town and they're going to give you 95 different ideas. And there were a couple of things that we saw in Barr that I really liked. Okay, so there was at Hotel de Ville, there were two big doors on each side of the main entrance to that building, and on each of them there was I guess I'll call it the coat of arms was on there, and one of the coat of arms was used all over town. You would see it on the lamp posts. It was a logo. It was a logo, and if you were there just more than 2 or 3 days, you recognize, okay, that's Barr, that's Barr, that's Barr, that's Barr. And I don't know if they use it on the Barr letterhead, or if you buy a Barr, Barr football since 1634 or something like that.
2024.
But if there were a Barr football team, that's what would be on the helmet, right? I mean, it's right. It's that branding and that logoizing, and it's about creating a feeling when people see things that are associated with you or hear the name. Okay, that was the fairy tale village. That was the village where everybody was polite and kind to me, and the buildings looked like they came out of a Grimm's fairy tale kind of thing. That it should create an impression, and that part of that is they're trying to decide what should that be, because they could abandon all of this and just let everything go to modern standards, and they would have a nice little town. But then pretty soon you'd have urban sprawl and things that people
you
don't
lose your identity in that sense.
Yeah. So that was Barr. Okay. And that's where it started. And it was, like I said, the mayor was wonderful. The other thing I did to the mayor is at the end, we got little certificates that said we've completed the thing. And we were getting ready to get the certificates handed out. And the mayor was looking at the certificates. And I said to her, oh, you're going to sign our certificates. And she was like, okay, I can sign them. And no one had planned to have her sign their certificates. So not only did we sign the golden book, but she signed all of our certificates, which was wonderful. I do hope to get the opportunity someday to go back and to see what happened to all these projects we worked on. But okay, so we're now one paragraph.
Yeah. So again, listener update here. We have 14 bullet points for this episode. We are through one.
Yes.
Well, right, so you got 6.5 more hours to this.
Yeah. Okay. So this is where it started. So there's the Rhine River there, and the water comes into the Rhine River from tributaries from the east and the west, And there are little towns, of course, along all of these things. And wherever there are waterfalls and stuff, there would be powered things for these towns. And one day we walked to the closest town, which was Mittelbergheim, which is, to me, that doesn't sound very French, right? But it's Alsatian.
Sounds German.
Well, it does, right? And there's a lot of German and French mixed in together here. And to me, that was a wonderful thing to see, these cultures mixed there. And you saw it mostly in town names like Mittelbergheim. And it was 2 kilometers away. So I have trouble. I always forget which one is which, but it's like 8/5, Harry? A kilometer is 8/5 of a mile, or miles 8/5 of a kilometer?
Oh, I always just do it as a 5K is 3.1 miles. Then based off of that.
So it was 2 kilometers away, which was like, I don't know, 10-minute walk. Something like that.
It's a mile and a quarter or so, yeah.
Yeah, so we walked over there through the vineyards. Okay, so this is all wine country, and there's vineyards all over the place, and they're on the rolling hillsides of these, going up from the Rhine Valley into it starts with a V, the Vogels, some kind of mountains that are on both sides, and it's very picturesque and very wonderful. And Mittelbergheim is substantially smaller than Barr, so it is wonderful in that sense. Little buildings packed up against the streets like they were in 1450 or whenever it was. And we did measured drawings of things. So the idea was you go find an ornament, an architectural detail that you like or appreciate, and you have your tape measure, and you go measure out all the important things, and you sketch it in a little sketchbook. And then when you get back to your home office studio, you draw a nice, pretty picture of that thing. So I drew a little arch there. And it was very interesting because we know that the top of Arch, Harry, has a keystone in the top, or a capstone, depending on how what you want to call it. But this one didn't. It had the stone coming up from one side. It went over the top, and then where there would normally be a gap between the capstone and one of the quarter capstones, there was a gap there, but there wasn't a matching gap on the other side. And what happened when you looked at this arch, the capstone piece had actually failed and fallen down.
I was going to say, did it collapse?
Yeah, well, it didn't collapse, right? Because it was still standing. But you could see where it was falling, the top piece was falling down inside that side piece. And it became very obvious to me why you need a capstone, why you can't do what they did. Because if you just think about the forces that are on that thing, it's going to just twist that guy and push it down underneath, and there's nothing balancing it on the other side. There's no other way to hold that up. So always make your arches symmetric, and that will help you a lot. I learned that there in Mittelbergheim. We saw that area of Europe has a lot of storks. Have you ever seen a stork?
I have seen herons.
Yes.
When I was little, I was walking through the creek, and I saw 2 herons about 3 feet away.
And they were the size of you.
Oh yeah, taller. Terrifying. Absolutely terrifying being a 12-year-old kid running into herons
in the creek. But these were these storks are big birds like herons, and they don't have any vocal cords. Right? Now I don't know if a lot of birds have vocal cords, but some of them sing, right? These guys don't. They take their beaks and they clap them together to make noise. And you would see these. The people there very much appreciate their storks. It's kind of a badge of honor, I guess, to have a stork set up camp on your house, although it's kind of a mess. But they will build these really, really, really big stork nests hopefully not on your chimney.
Right.
Because you have to, the chimney disposes of vent. Yeah. And so some people have a chimney, but they'll also have I'm sure there's a word of it in French, German.
Fake chimney for storks.
That's it. Yeah, it translates to fake chimney for storks, and they would build it. And these things can get huge, Harry, like 2 meters across. These gigantic.
Look at you! You went to Europe, and now you're speaking in meters.
Well, they did a lot of stuff in meters there, and
you knew exactly how wide that was.
Yes,
again,
I did.
Listeners, he put his arms out and says, "I'm approximately 6 feet tall."
It's about
my
2
fingertips.
meters.
This is about 2 meters.
Yeah,
so I'm so proud of you.
Thank you. I'll tell you,
you did learn something.
When you're an international media relations superstar, the way I am, you have to meet the audience where they are, Harry. That's the lesson from today's podcast. So, but these are really big stork nests, and they can weigh a lot. And every now and then you have to take them down, but they can weigh hundreds of pounds. Wow. Notice I didn't go to kilos there.
Yeah.
All right. So there's 2 old churches in Mittelbergheim. The oldest one is run by the Protestants because they came to kick Catholics out after the Reformation. And the Catholics said, after a while, the Catholics said, can we come back in? We'll build our own church. So they built, the new one is from, I don't know, after what's maybe 200 or 300 years old. And the old one dates back somewhere, dates back about to the 700s or earlier. The old one is like 13 or 1400 years old.
Wow. Yeah.
And there's this, and depending on who you're talking to and how well they translate, you may get different dates. But there's this window in this one corner that when the sun is at noon on the winter solstice, the sunbeam comes through that window, through another window on the other side of that room, through the wall onto a statue that sits in an inner.
And then it shows you the map and the location of the ark.
That's exactly what it does. But somebody lost the capstone. And
yeah, it's probably at the top of a staff somewhere.
Yeah, somewhere broken in a base. Raiders of the Lost Ark reference. There you go. So there's very cool things going on there. It was Mittelbergheim and Barr were great. We learned that craftsmen oftentimes don't use the metric system, even in Europe. Okay. And the reason is that base 10 is really good for working with large numbers that you are, I don't know, you're like if you want to measure the distance from the Earth to the moon or like.
Right. Or what's the equatorial distance of the circumference of the Earth? Or that kind of thing.
Yes, things like that. But if you're building a house, then you're going to use a local human-based measure. And a lot of these little towns that you went to, you could actually determine what was considered the standard foot in that town. There would be 2 marks on a building somewhere. And if you're a craftsman coming into town, you would say, boop, here's the foot. I would take a stick, I'll make it that long, and now I have a foot that I can use. And if you use base 12 as your division there in the foot, it's very easy to divide in 2. It's easy to divide in 3, and it's easy to divide in 4. So a lot of the craftsmen that I worked with over the course of this last 8 weeks, they used feet and inches because it was a very easy thing to use. It was a very human-based measure. And, 34 centimeters is
I guess
hard
when you're
to do.
building the desk or a chair, there's nothing really on the chair that works well within a meter.
Right.
Unless you're talking like 30 centimeters here and 40 centimeters there, or you could do 2.5 feet.
Right.
It's pretty easy.
So the simpler you can make the measure that you're using, the better. And that's not necessarily a knock at the metric system, but as we've talked before on an episode, I don't know, sometime in the past 2 years, that the metric system is no less arbitrary than any of the other imperial systems. Mm-hmm. And the base units are great. I mean, you can do all those powers of 10 things, and they come in 10 to the third kind of steps, but they miss a lot of, it only lands on 1, 10, 100, 1,000, and everything else is a messy number in between. If you're on base 2, for example, you land on 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. So those are nice divisions and make it easy to work.
Within base 10 again.
Yes, right. So there's all sorts of different, there's all sorts of things that you can do when you go to a town and you're looking at these old buildings. If you figure out like how far it is from the corner of the building to the first window, and you kind of step that off with your arms, you will find that measurement, whatever it is, that was probably the width of the guy's arms who built the house. All right. And it's a human-sized thing. And we spent a lot of time talking about that sort of stuff. So that's where we got started, Harry, with some of those things that were in Barr, architectural things, measurement things, other fun stuff that I learned. And when we get back next time, we will talk about things I saw in Strasbourg when I went back officially with the school to learn about Strasbourg, which is kind of the capital of Alsace. It's kind of the center right there, and we will pick this up there.
I mean, you learned a lot. You had a lot of good experiences. This is, I feel like, just dusting off the very top. How did it change you?
It is
because that was a question that my brother-in-law asked you, and I feel like I should ask it to you again.
Yeah. So how did it change me? I like think about how I've talked about things. These things that I didn't there's so many things I didn't know. And like I said last week, everything I learned revealed another 5 or 6 things that I didn't know. But I like it almost always is. Whenever I come back from a visit to a place where I'm at the mercy of the locals, mostly for language, I'm overwhelmed by the generosity and the graciousness of my hosts. That's the thing I learned the most. Alsace is a beautiful place, and I love Paris too. But man, I'll take Alsace 100 times in a row over Paris, because I've learned to really appreciate how the small towns interact with the people who live there. They are like, Harry, we met the mayor, and she's this lady, and she loves the city, and that's she really loves her city, and she can, because it's small enough, she can impact it.
Right.
The newspaper man can impact it. The girl at the croissant shop can impact her city by how she lives her life. And when you live that way, you start to see, you have a tangible way to manifest the good. And that's a wonderful thing. And even though Paris is great, like I said, and Cologne has its things, and Brussels has its stuff, it's really hard to make an impact there. It's hard sometimes just to survive. But a place like Bruges, like we'll get to eventually, and in Barr in France, man, I loved it. I just loved it. And so how has it changed me? I fell in love with Barr. It was great. It was great.
Oh, good. And it seems like you and the people you met really espoused the values here on the Buff.
This was like the Buff World Tour Summer School Edition. It was great. It was great.
All right. Well, we hope the listeners enjoyed doing this and listening to the beginning of Rafe's adventures. And we remind you to do what he did, which was to seek the good, live virtuously, and flourish, and enjoy the adventure of life. It's going to be a great day.